Fractions and percents are the same. They're parts of wholes. So we can actually change a fraction into a percent to get the same value. So step 1 to changing a fraction to a percent is to write the fraction as a decimal, because the other day we learned how to change decimals to percents. So if you know how to change a decimal to a percent, all you have to do is change the fraction into a decimal and then change the decimal into a percent. So step 1 is to write the fraction as a decimal. Okay? Step 2, once you change the fraction to a decimal, you're going to change the decimal to a percent. And it says, see the Dr. Pepper page. So the notes that we had taken the other day, right? That's how you change decimals to percents. All right, so let's do an example. So if I gave you, for example, let's start off with something fairly easy. Let's do 3/8. How do we change 3/8 to a decimal? Well, you can change a fraction to a decimal by getting the denominator to be a 10, 100, or 1,000, right? For eighths, you can change it to thousands by multiplying by the special number 125. So 8 times 125 gets you to 1,000 in the denominator. 3 times 125 is 375. So we got it to 375 thousandths. We can now easily write it as a decimal. 375 thousandths would be 375. It has to land in the thousand spot, which is 3 places behind the decimal. So now that we've changed it to a decimal, we can change the decimal to percent. How do we change 375 thousandths into a percent? You draw the but. You move the decimal 2 spaces to the right. You draw the but. And so now the decimal is behind the 7, so the percent is 37.5%. Or you can say it's 37.5%. So that's how we change fractions to percents. Change the fraction into a decimal, and then change the decimal to percent. Let's do one more example. What if I had, let's say an easier one, let's say I had 11/20ths, right? Well, get the denominator to be tenths, hundredths, or thousandths first. So in this case, you can multiply it by 5/5. That gives us 55 hundredths, right? And since we got it to a power of 10 hundredths, remember decimals are in tenths, hundredths, or thousandths, we can easily write it as a decimal. This would be 55 hundredths. And then change the decimal to percent. How do we change a decimal to percent? You move the decimal 2 places to the right. Draw the but. And now it's behind the 5. So then this would be 55%. Now, I know some of you guys are probably thinking, well, what if your fraction turns into a decimal that repeats, that goes on forever? So let's say, for example, 1/3. We know that 1/3, if you do long division, you can't change the 3 into tenths, hundredths, or thousandths. That's one of those that you cannot. You do long division. When you divide, it ends up being 0.3 repeating. It goes 0.3333333. Well, you do the same thing. If the decimal is 0.3 repeating, you can still only move the decimal place 2 places to the right. You draw the but, 1, 2, and that's where it lands. Well, what's behind this 3? Not a 0 because it's repeating. There's a lot more 3's behind that 3, right? But you can only move the decimal 2 spaces. So your percent would be 33.3 repeating percent. Okay. Another way to write that is 33 1/3%. You can also write it like a fraction if you don't want the repeating in your percent. You can also say it's 33 1/3%. Okay, so that's how you change fractions to percents. Well, how do you change percents to fractions? Well, all percents are out of 100, right? So since all percents are out of 100, you would write the percent as a fraction. So write the percent as a fraction over 100, because the 100% would make a whole. So your denominator would be 100. So write the percent as a fraction over 100. Remember, percent means out of 100, or for every 100, right? For every 100. So let's do an example. Let's say I gave you 36%. Okay? 36%, well, percents are out of 100, so you write it like a fraction, 36 out of 100, like that. And then all you have to do, step 2, is to simplify it. So then 36 out of 100 Well, they're both divisible by 4, so we can simplify by 4, and that would give us 9 over 25. So that would be the simplified fraction for 36%. Now, sometimes your percents have decimals in them, kind of like up here, right? Sometimes your percents have decimals in them. So then how do we change percents to fractions? Well, you can still put it out of 100. So for example, let's use this one. Let's say we had 37.5%. 37.5%. You can still put it out of 100. That's still correct. So then this would be 37.5 out of 100. It just looks a little weird. It's not a proper way to write a fraction. Usually we don't have decimals inside a fraction, but that does equal 37.5%. So they are equal. If you want to write it properly without the decimal, what you should do is change the percent into a decimal first. How do we change percents into decimals? We move the decimal 2 spaces back to the left. You draw the butt, right? So the decimal for this is 375 thousandths. Then you can write it as a fraction without the decimal in it. It would be 375 over 1,000. Instead of 37.5 out of 100, it's 375 over 1,000. So this would be the proper way to write it. Of course, you still have to simplify it. So then you would say, okay, 375 over 1,000. Simplified, now if you remember your eighths, you'll remember that this actually equals 3/8, right? So if you simplified it correctly, this one ends up being 3/8. So that's how you change percents back to fractions.